A deadly collapse strikes at the heart of a Florida community.
They were scrambling to clear the area. Everybody was thinking that they were far enough, but it wasn't.
In Texas, a catastrophic collision on a vital crossing.
Car after car driving off of a bridge that was no longer there for them.
In Spain, World Heritage historic houses on the brink of disaster.
You've got more than 1,000 years of history just hanging in the balance.
And in Georgia, a football stadium with a state-of-the-art roof that was refusing to play ball.
Engineers were still trying to fine-tune it all.
No matter how they tried, there was a hole there.
With big builds, even the smallest fail can trigger a huge disaster. From miscalculations to misunderstandings, or just plain bad luck. These catastrophes are every engineer's worst nightmare. In big engineering, detailed planning and construction is crucial. Any change can be the difference between success and failure. Like this collapse in Florida, where a demolition turned to disaster.
A 13-story apartment block crashed to the ground in the blink of an eye.
A tower takedown that caused chaos and catastrophe.
The building fell, dropped here, and fell into the street.
A devastating scene that ended in tragedy.
Two very large pieces of debris came flying out of this collapse.
This is like the building being cut off at the knees.
Miami Beach, Florida. This 14-kilometer-long barrier island dividing the Atlantic from Biscayne Bay has been drawing people to its shores for decades.
Just over 100 years ago, Miami Beach was actually a swampland, but it's been transformed into a tourist mecca, boasting museums and concert halls, but it's best known for the beautiful golden beaches.
Local TV journalist Karen Duva knows all about this area's magnetic attraction.
Miami has so much to offer. Obviously, the weather is gorgeous year-round. If you love the water, there's boating, there's snorkeling. You're never going to be bored if you live in Miami.
In the U.S., Florida is second only to Texas in terms of population growth. And with amazing weather and endless beaches, it's easy to see why.
More people means more homes. But on a narrow strip of land hemmed in by the sea, real estate is at a premium.
With a growing population, you need housing. And Florida is overbuilt, so you have to keep building up.
In 2018, to make way for an up-and-coming development, an aging condo from the 1960s was scheduled for demolition. The 13-story Marlborough house.
When you build an apartment tower like this, the intention is for it to stand tall for decades. So when it comes to demolition, engineers always have their work cut out.
As forensic engineer Bill Bracken explains, demolition methods can vary.
There's two main ways to bring down an existing building. One is to implode the building, which is where you're going to use explosives and bring it down all at once. The other is to demolish the building, where you're going to take it apart in pieces.
In a busy neighborhood lined with condos, implosion was firmly off the table.
To bring a building like that down, in that space you have environmental concerns, you have adjacent property concerns, using explosives in a dense urban city center. An implosion permit that is that close to the neighboring buildings just is not practical, and you wouldn't see it in a city like Miami.
Contractors were granted a demolition permit to bring the tower down the old-fashioned way, piece by piece, floor by floor.
Demolition was scheduled for late July and expected to last about 2 weeks. But it turned out this condo wasn't going to hang around for that long. In the early morning of Monday, July the 23rd, demolition was well underway. Concrete specialist Albert Cabada was working nearby.
We were working doing the restoration of the two buildings directly south of the Marlboro House. It was going to be a standard demolition in which they bring the building down in pieces rather than the entire building falling at once.
Albert noticed something was wrong.
They were scrambling to clear the area. This is very unorthodox. Normally you would clear the area prior to any construction work or any demolition work. Something was about to happen.
Albert and his crew quickly laid down their tools and vacated the premises. His instinct paid off. Moments later, disaster struck. "13 stories of concrete and metal crashed to the ground."
There was no dynamite, no explosion, but this condo came down in seconds.
When it fell pancake style, dropped here, and fell into the street. Everybody was standing across the street thinking that they were far enough, but it wasn't.
The collapse hurled massive chunks of concrete across the road.
The workers that were standing in the middle of the street began to run. The debris itself flew approximately 200 feet across the street.
As workers scrambled for safety, television journalist Karen Duver heard some devastating news.
A piece of debris that was the size of a hood of an automobile came crashing down onto a construction worker, hit him, and threw him about 5 feet.
Miraculously, most onlookers escaped unscathed, while the injured worker was rushed to the hospital. Sadly, he later died from his injuries. The Miami Beach community was stunned. Everyone wanted to know how this demolition had gone so tragically wrong.
Of course, there was a lot of speculation and a lot of questions that needed to be answered. How were people able to be so close to the building? And what about the workers? Why weren't they safe? What kind of permit did they have?
Forensic engineer Bill Bracken believes the problem was in the method of demolition used.
They were granted a demolition permit, but not an implosion permit. So they were able to bring it down in pieces, but not by pulling it all down at once. This would involve starting at your upper floors. You would take the outside of the building off, get it down to the frame of the building, and just take it off one level at a time, passing it to the ground. And it takes much longer, it involves much more equipment, and it can often be a more expensive process.
But a few days before the disaster, concrete specialist Albert Cabada noticed something odd, involving a small machine known as a skid steer.
A skid steer is a small, versatile digger. It can be used for everything from heavy lifting to digging trenches, but not normally as a demolition machine.
They were actually taking a skid steer and bringing it up into the building, which is very unusual, and removing large sections of the flooring and columns. They were knocking out support beams, actual floor slabs, and chipping columns.
This wasn't the only strange thing to occur. On the morning of the disaster, a much larger digger was also seen at the site.
They had tied a chain to this tractor, and they were yanking on one of the support columns. Why they were doing this, we have no clue. We started to hear cracking of the columns.
This seemed to some to indicate a different demolition technique, known as a blowdown or pull-down. It's quicker than a standard demolition, but far less predictable.
If you want to bring a building down, basically an implosion without explosives, it's kind of like cutting down a tree. You cut a wedge and you want it to get to fall a certain way. You soften that ground floor so that you identify the last critical columns and you pull those out, and that controls the way the building falls.
And with a blowdown, that control is key.
Because it's a fairly inaccurate technique, the pull-down method is normally used on buildings that are isolated, so that if something does go wrong, there's minimal risk to surrounding structures or people.
It's a very uncontrolled method of demolition. In a dense urban area, that's just not the way to do this.
This is like the building being cut off at the knees.
Debris is going to go everywhere. It is a very real safety issue. In this instance, two very large pieces of debris came flying out of this uncontrolled collapse and impacted a construction worker just across the street. There were no safety measures, there were no barriers to protect him.
While the city of Miami was left reeling, residents and officials alike were determined to make sure this never happened again. In the aftermath, the Miami Beach commissioners sought to strengthen the city's demolition policies, including being notified of exactly when and how any future demolition would take place.
Safe demolition, whatever the method, is difficult at the best of times, but hopefully, with tighter regulations, disasters like this will become a thing of the past.
With the site cleared, construction on the new condo began in April 2019 and was completed just over 2 years later. Yet the need for new housing development continues to grow.
There's a very high demand for these types of high-end condos, waterfront condos in Miami. I'm sure there were time demands. I'm sure there was a schedule that had to be met. Something was sacrificed, and in this case, it was the safety.
Bridge engineers are constantly battling every weapon in Mother Nature's arsenal, but sometimes disaster can strike from somewhere completely unexpected. Like this catastrophe in Texas, a devastating disaster on one of the state's most vital crossings.
One single catastrophic event could disconnect a whole community from the mainland.
Sudden destruction on a massive scale.
Hundreds of tons of concrete came crashing down in the blink of an eye.
And a shocking tragedy that took everyone by surprise.
Car after car driving off of a bridge that was no longer there for them.
South Padre Island sits on the Gulf of Mexico at the very southern tip of Texas. Stretching around 55 kilometers long with stunning beaches, tourists flock to its shores. But there's a catch. The island is accessible via one route. The almost 4-kilometer-long Queen Isabella Causeway. Local Robert Espericueta knows this Texan hotspot well.
The Queen Isabella Causeway is what brings the people to and off of the island. 9 million people, more or less, occupy that island yearly.
It's not just tourism. Residents also depend on the vast crossing. Journalist Bertha Gonzalez grew up nearby.
People that live on the island depend on the causeway. People that live on the mainland but work on the island depend on the causeway because we do not have a boat ferry or a vehicle ferry.
This is a vital, vital organ. This is the main artery of this community's heart.
The Queen Isabella Causeway opened in 1974, and today it's the second longest bridge in Texas, with a staggering 147 concrete spans connecting South Padre with the mainland.
To keep maritime trade moving, it rises around 23 meters above the water, with a 230-meter main span, bridging the busy shipping channel below. It's a crucial part of the Gulf Intracoastal Waterway.
The Gulf Intracoastal Waterway is a major inland waterway that carries commercial shipping all the way from the southern tip of Texas to Florida without risking the open sea.
Where the causeway crosses the navigation channel, it relies on some heavyweight engineering, known as a continuous steel span. Rex Costley is Deputy District Engineer for the Texas Department of Transportation.
Here's the beginning of the 750-foot continuous steel girder unit. You got your rocker bearings down here, massive diaphragms, vertical stiffeners, or lateral stiffeners. This beam is anywhere from 8 to 12 feet deep. You have the traffic load on top that gets transferred to the beams. Those loads then get transferred over to the columns below us. Then those loads get transferred into the foundation.
Today, this vital system of support keeps the causeway standing strong.
The Queen Isabella Causeway is a mammoth feat of engineering, and there's a good reason this central span is so incredibly robust.
It's all down to a disaster that struck from nowhere more than 2 decades ago. Friday night, September the 14th, 2001. Robert Espericueta was on the water heading to a nearby fishing spot, Laguna Madre, in search of respite after a national tragedy.
4 days after 9/11, my cousins and I decided that we wanted to go fishing just to kind of get our minds off of what was going on in the world.
Robert and his group were on their boat about 140 meters north of the causeway when the dark silence was suddenly broken.
We heard the sound of metal scratching up against concrete, and this huge boom followed it right afterwards, and a slap. We stopped fishing and we started looking around to kind of see, well, where's this coming from?
At 2 a.m., without warning, an almost 50-meter section of the bridge had collapsed into the water below.
The night was dark and we couldn't really see what was going on. At this point, we literally think that we're under attack.
Fledgling reporter Bertha Gonzalez, then just 20 years old, raced to the scene.
We did not know what had happened or what had caused it. It was so close, days away from the 9/11 attack. So the main fear for all of us was that it was an attack as well.
But this was no attack. A barge loaded with thousands of tons of steel had missed the main navigation channel by more than 90 meters, ramming into the Queen Isabella Causeway.
The section of highway slapped the water so hard, it splashed the water so high up that it looked like rain to us.
In the darkness, vehicles had no idea that the bridge was down.
The engines revving out of control where the individuals were slamming on the pedals in desperation, trying to stop or get out of the way or speed up. I could not believe what I was witnessing. Car after car driving off of a bridge that was no longer there for them.
Robert and his cousins raced towards the bridge.
We were the only ones out there. We struck flares in hopes that the drivers on the bridge would see us. Eventually, somebody saw our flares and stopped the traffic.
Their quick thinking and inspired use of safety flares had stopped traffic, but 9 vehicles had already fallen into the chasm where the roadway had collapsed.
We began to hear the survivors floating in the water. We were able to approach them and offer them flotation devices and life jackets and ultimately pull them into our vessel and get them out of the water.
Of the 11 people that went down with the bridge, tragically 8 lost their lives. Robert and his cousins were able to pull 3 survivors from the water below.
It's traumatic, it is life-changing. I still to this day can't believe what I witnessed. It still seems foreign to me.
The tragedy left residents in shock and completely stranded, with their only link to the mainland cut off.
We never really thought that one single catastrophic event could really disconnect a whole community from the mainland.
2 days after the disaster, ferries were brought in to help bridge the divide, but this was just a band-aid.
There was a lot of chaos and confusion. Growing up here, the Queen Isabella Causeway is iconic for us. And just to see it kind of so wounded and injured, it was just kind of surreal.
Officials needed to identify the cause of the accident to prevent it from happening again. The first question was why had the barge missed the main navigation channel by more than 90 meters?
Although huge, The barges were in single file and just a fraction of the width of the shipping channel. So the big question was, why were they so far off course?
While the report cited human error, it also found that the sea conditions and configuration of the vessel may have played a part in the catastrophe.
That night, the Coast Guard had issued an advisory to smaller vessels, warning of riptides and strong cross-currents. But the report found that the same currents might have been strong enough to push the massive front barges way off course.
These vessels don't have brakes. They don't have the ability to pivot and stop on a dime. It was just impossible to recorrect. By the time he had realized that he was off course 80 yards, it was too late.
And once the barge hit the bridge, the concrete structure had no chance.
A concrete column or pier is great in compression and can handle heavy vertical loads really well.
But its Achilles heel is side impact, a massive strike that can cause it to crack. And if the impact is big enough, bring the whole thing crashing down.
As Texas transportation engineer Rex Costley explains, the possibility of side impact had not been factored into the original plans.
An errant vessel is not typically anticipated in a design. That's not the intent at the time of the bridge when it was designed.
When the heavy barges struck a pier, the effect was instantaneous and deadly.
As that gave way, other members were compromised and acted as a unit and kind of crumbled onto one another.
But the bridge collapse itself wasn't the only problem. Vehicles had continued to drive into the void until Robert and his cousins lit flares.
Because of the way the bridge is kind of designed, if you're coming up, you don't see what's happening. And that was one of the reasons that cars kept falling when the bridge collapsed.
People were essentially driving blind. They didn't stand a chance.
All of these things equaled the perfect storm and scenario for catastrophe, for just tragedy.
As the community mourned, engineers knew they needed to fix this vital link, and fast.
I think they worked extra hard and made sure that the effort was all hands on deck so that they could get it done. The bridge came down September 15th, and by November, the bridge was ready to go, and it was ahead of schedule.
In all, 3 spans of the bridge were rebuilt much more robustly than before, and this time the supporting piers were given extra protection with some defensive measures in the water below.
We implemented dolphin docks, and they're basically just massive concrete piers parallel to the bridge in case an errant vessel, and that would be the sacrificial element that would get hit.
A new early warning system was also added to protect motorists in the event of another accident.
Along the bridge are traffic arms that prevent traffic from moving forward onto the bridge. Flashing lights come on either end to alert the traffic for a stop condition. Another safety measure that we're pretty proud of.
With the motorist warning system, the super strong main span, and extra protection down below, this bridge is the safest it's ever been.
More than 20 years later, for Robert and others, the bridge is a stark reminder of that fateful night, one of heartbreak, but also of heroism.
Against all odds, we managed to preserve 3 wonderful people's lives, and that's something substantial to me.
From epic structures to towering cities, the mark of good engineering is staying power. But when it comes to centuries-old construction, there's just no fighting the ravages of time. Like this catastrophe in Spain that nearly devastated an ancient hilltop town.
The face had slipped, bringing tons of earth and rock crashing down.
Y el desastre era increíble que se había arrancado. Todo esto era una especie de zona cero.
Destruction that shocked an entire community.
you've got more than 1,000 years of history just hanging in the balance.
But in the wake of an enormous disaster, this historic town had another priority in mind.
Lo primero que preguntamos era si había víctimas mortales. Era algo que no sabíamos todavía y no era descartable.
Cuenca in southern Spain. This ancient mountaintop city has been moulded by the land it stands on. With near bird's-eye views of the surrounding landscape, it was a prized strategic location.
Cuenca started life around 1,000 years ago as a fortified citadel, built by invaders from Africa known as the Moors. It was a defensive hub from which they could raid the heartland of Spain.
Today, medieval armies have been replaced with tourists, drawn by Cuenca's unique architectural marvels, the hanging houses. Leo Cortillo is a local journalist.
Y hace que el entorno en el que nos encontremos sea objeto de visita de infinidad de turistas, no solo nacionales, sino de todo el mundo. Con las casas colgadas como punta de lanza, con las casas colgadas como el emblema más importante que tenemos.
Cuenca gained UNESCO status in 1996 for its architectural and cultural value, joining an exclusive list of iconic locations like the Old City of Jerusalem and the Great Wall of China.
Although it's up for debate who constructed the hanging houses and when. They have towered over the 60-metre deep Huecar River Gorge since at least the 15th century. Their precarious position the result of the prime location. Historian Miguel Romero is official chronicler of the city.
Cuenca, sabéis, es una ciudad colgada en un farallón rocoso y hay que construir elevando, pero se construye de arriba abajo.
With solid rock foundations, the houses could be built tall and slim, making maximum use of their footprint.
These hanging houses are prototype skyscrapers, hewn into the rock centuries before we got our modern versions of glass and steel.
500 years ago, Cuenca's hilltop town was thriving and in need of better access to its surroundings.
The decision was made to build a bridge across the Huecar River Gorge, as well as a cliffside road linking both with the hanging houses.
By the 20th century, the road, known as Cañonegas Street, had become the main thoroughfare for tourists visiting the hanging houses. But beneath the ancient masonry, a catastrophe was brewing. May 2021, locals reported hearing a loud boom.
They thought it was a garbage collection or something had fallen off a truck.
But this was no rubbish truck. It was the sound of Cañonegas Street collapsing.
The face of the cliff road had slipped, bringing tons of earth and rock crashing down.
Leo was one of the first to arrive.
Y el desastre era increíble. Recuerdo perfectamente el sonido de las sirenas. Estaban llegando los policías, los bomberos. Era un poco de caos que se había arrancado. Todo esto era una especie de zona cero. Lo primero que preguntamos era si había víctimas mortales.
In the debris, engineer Miguel Valiente García saw an excavator that had been working on the road that morning.
La máquina se cayó, estaba allá abajo. Era una máquina pequeña, lo que se llama una mini, pero estaba abajo.
Miraculously, the workers had escaped unharmed, thanks to the timing of the collapse.
Con la suerte de que los trabajadores en ese momento se habían ido a almorzar, porque si no, posiblemente estaríamos hablando de pérdidas humanas.
And yet, the city still held its breath. The failure had left the world-famous hanging houses on uncertain ground.
Muy preocupados por la repercusión que pudiera tener esto en las casas colgadas.
The houses held firm for now, but the cliffside road that had stood strong for centuries was destroyed.
Lo que era la joya de nuestra corona estaba en el suelo tirada. Las preguntas eran entonces muchísimas.
Many saw the excavator as a clue. Had work on the road triggered the catastrophe? Miguel Valiente García's company was brought in to stabilize the damage, and found evidence dating back 5 centuries that hinted at the cause. The road was not as rock solid as it seemed.
Una vez que se limpió parte de la ladera, nos dimos cuenta que como el trasdós del muro se había rellenado con terreno de huertas de la zona del Huécar, se iba desmoronando.
5 centuries ago, builders had used soil from nearby orchards to support the road, holding it in place with a masonry retaining wall.
By modern standards, the construction materials weren't the best, but that said, they did hold the road up for centuries. So chances are there was something else going on too.
Investigators turned to what the workers had been there to fix, a leaky sewer beneath the cliff road.
Y lo que los técnicos estudiaron con anterioridad al derrumbe es que había filtraciones. Básicamente eran pérdidas de agua. Esos canales lo que tenían eran agujeritos por los que el agua se iba escapando.
All that liquid had destabilized the ancient soil behind the retaining wall.
El terreno, si está seco, ocupa un volumen. Si se humedece, aumenta el volumen y eso hace empujar al muro. El empuje del agua es peor que el empuje del terreno.
As the soil absorbed water and expanded, it increased the pressure on the wall until the ancient masonry failed and the roadway crumbled.
Today, a cliffside road like this could be made with a modern material designed to easily allow any water to drain so that it doesn't expand.
That explained why the cliff road collapsed, but the residents of Cuenca were left to wonder if their world-famous cliffside houses would survive the aftermath. The first step was to investigate the rock on which the ancient houses stand.
Comprobaron todos los terrenos y comprobaron, y es muy importante, el macizo rocoso, la roca sobre la que se asientan las casas colgadas.
De hecho, se hicieron estudios topográficos y no había afectado nada.
With confirmation that the hanging houses still had rock-solid foundations, the city breathed a sigh of relief, and attention turned to the crucial connection leading up to them. Miguel and his team took on the repair job. The first step was to create a robust foundation.
Dar tierra. Y entonces hubo que hacer una cosa que se llama cunitado, que es ponerle una malla de acero y darle hormigón, y proyectar hormigón para sujetarlo, para que no se cayera más.
The concrete and mesh base was built up with modern fill, further anchored to the cliff with 6 steel beams.
Esas 3 filas que ahí se pueden ver se construyeron con unos bulones que anclamos a la roca.
With the core now rock solid, the next challenge was recreating the masonry retaining wall.
Experts used photographs taken before the collapse to painstakingly replace each stone using traditional lime mortar instead of modern cement. But to ensure the event wasn't forgotten, they didn't try to completely hide the repair.
Teníamos un arqueólogo a pie de obra y luego ellos no querían eso, que se crearan los falsos históricos, pero querían que se supiera que esto era una reconstrucción.
In December 2021, 7 months after the collapse, Cañonegas Street's road to recovery was complete.
Esa herida que teníamos en el corazón se cerró, se cicatrizó, se abrió y además coincidió con una efeméride muy importante en la ciudad, que es el 25 aniversario de la declaración de esta cuenca como ciudad Patrimonio de la Humanidad por la UNESCO.
Once again, visitors were invited to experience the iconic architecture of the hanging houses of Cuenca.
Me siento muy orgulloso y sobre todo el siendo nativo de Cuenca, pero el haber formado parte de esta obra que va a quedar debajo de las casas colgadas para siempre, pues la verdad es que he quedado muy a gusto.
Como historiador y especialmente como cronista oficial de esta ciudad, me siento orgulloso de ella, ¿no? Creo que es una de las ciudades más bonitas que puede haber en el mundo.
Hopefully, Cuenca's houses will be hanging around for hundreds of years to come.
With big structures, engineers are constantly striving to push the limits of technology. But sometimes that ambition causes problems of its own. Like this football stadium in Georgia, where a state-of-the-art roof was feeling the strain.
All the fans had an opinion. The roof was always a bone of contention.
A technical flaw that had designers working overtime.
Engineers were still trying to fine-tune it all.
Leaving fans worried that America's biggest sporting event could pass them by.
Without those facilities, they're not even going to consider your town.
Atlanta, Georgia's state capital, is one of America's go-to cities when it comes to big business. Steve Fennessy is a local journalist.
Atlanta's home to many Fortune 500 companies. Some of the biggest companies in America are headquartered here. Thousands and thousands of people come through here every single day.
Atlanta started life at the end of the Western and Atlantic Railroad and was simply nicknamed Terminus. But it's grown into a major hub for transportation, culture, and big business.
And in a city where people like to work hard, leisure time is a serious business too. Atlanta has become a hub of American sports, but arguably all are sidelined by one in particular: football.
Football is incredibly important to people who live in Atlanta, Georgia. College football and especially professional football.
Brothers Paul and Charlie Cross have been fans since childhood.
Our area, this part of the country, is fanatical about football at every level. It's the base of all communities. They start playing football at 5 and 6 years old here. So fans are born very, very early.
And at the heart of this football-crazed town is the city's professional team. Fan Patrick Seals explains.
We have great chicken wings and we have good football. I've been playing and watching football since I was in the 6th grade. Man, I can't get enough of it. Game day is hectic.
Their hectic home for over 2 decades was this, the Georgia Dome, built in 1992 to withstand Atlanta's changeable seasons.
The covered dome could hold 70,000 people, come rain or shine. But across a nearly 5-month football season, sometimes being stuck indoors just didn't sit right with the fans.
In the Georgia Dome, where people are huddled together, screaming, yelling passionately, and it'd be good every now and again to get a game outside where I can breathe fresh air.
The solution was a brand new futuristic billion-dollar stadium, complete with a one-of-a-kind retractable roof.
The crowning glory of the stadium is the vast retractable roof. The 8 panels each look like a futuristic airplane and work together, almost like a camera shutter, to open or close the roof.
The 8 petals, almost the size of a city block, cantilever out 60 meters over an oval opening. Each petal is attached to the stadium with 2 sets of tracks in parallel. The outside uplift rails are gripped with wheels like a roller coaster, preventing the 450-ton petals from tipping. The inner track provides the power to move the petals back and forth with 8 wheel-driven systems called bogies, opening and closing like a giant eye.
But it's an optical illusion. In reality, the individual petals move in a straight line along their own tracks.
The new state-of-the-art stadium would stand 30 stories tall and cover an area of over 185,000 square meters, almost the same size as Grand Central Station. Charlie Cross, an ironworker on the Atlanta landmark, was impressed by the scale of ambition.
They said they were going to do something different, way different, but we didn't have any idea that it was going to be to the level.
Work began in 2014, but the retractable roof was about to prove a real eye-opener for engineers. With a scheduled grand opening of March 2017, the construction team didn't have time to lose.
The outside of the stadium and the interior itself, doing the seating and all, that was all on schedule, but things slowed down tremendously when the roof came up.
To close, every petal has to fit perfectly together. But it seems reality didn't quite match the magical design plans.
When they brought them in without being motorized, they tried it and got it to come together. No matter how they tried, there was a hole left.
The problem had engineers stumped, and local sports fans were sure the resulting delays would cost them big.
Delays were causing the city to panic because here they were trying to bid for these particular games, but they could not put their bids in with the roof not working correctly. For a city to get a championship game for any sport, you have to have the facilities in place. And without those facilities, they're not even going to consider your town.
Concerned fans were clamoring to know what had caused the delays. It seems the unique petal design was the root of the issues.
Some of the connections, fabrication connections, some of them had to go back, be refabricated. Just a little bit off. I mean, sometimes just millimeters would cause serious problems.
Even with the refabricated parts and the petals reattached, the hole in the roof remained.
They had a gap, it wouldn't close up, so they had to make a patch and put this patch over that hole.
One of the petals would be equipped with a cap that would seal the stadium when the petals closed. By 2017, the stadium had run out of time. It had to open for the football season, with a roof that wasn't quite ready.
The roof wasn't automated, meaning you should be able to hit a button. They couldn't do that because engineers were still trying to figure out, they're trying to fine-tune it all.
This is precision engineering. Every petal has to be perfectly balanced, and its mechanized wheels, or bogies, calibrated to move at exactly the right speed. If just one thing goes wrong, the whole structure will grind to a halt.
The delays on construction meant that engineers had not yet calibrated the mechanical bogies responsible for moving the petals. The decision was made to keep the roof closed.
So the first few events at the stadium, the people are, they're naturally a little disappointed because it had been hyped up a lot that this was going to have a retractable roof.
Ultimately, engineers needed one all too scarce resource to get the roof's bogies functional and fully automated: time.
For safety reasons, the fix couldn't be done when fans were inside. But with a full slate of events from music to sports, finding time to do the job was a massive challenge.
This was so complex that calibrating all 8 bogies to deliver exactly the right amount of power could take 40 days.
But for the people of Atlanta, 40 straight days without a stadium was not an option. So construction was planned around events, spreading the necessary 40 days over 6 months. Finally, in June 2018, the new stadium roof opened for the first time under its own power.
The first game I went to when the stadium opened, I was like a kid in a candy store. I couldn't wait to get inside and see how this thing looked. They had been talking about it all year on TV. I had to find out for myself how it was gonna look.
After years of speculation, the stadium's cutting-edge technology was finally effective.
When the ceilings open, I don't know how to describe it, it's a canopy. You just feel like everybody can come in from the outside.
It took about 3 years. Initial costs it was cost around $1 billion, but it went up to about $1.6 billion ultimately.
But whatever the cost of the stadium, for the fans, it was worth the wait.
Every year we have more and more activities and championships. The building doesn't seem to be getting old and outdated. It seems like we're still growing with it and we're still getting more and more activity in it.
Atlanta's new stadium has proved to be a success for the city, not just a highlight on the professional football schedule, but a showpiece of innovation and design.